the Black Willow River, cut through the land like a wound that refused to heal. Wide, cold, and unpredictable, it had claimed wagons, livestock, and more lives than most settlers cared to count. Those who survived its crossing spoke of it in hushed tones, as if the water itself listened. Arthur Hale knew the river better than anyone. Each morning, before the sun burned away the fog, Arthur stood at the riverbank and studied its surface. He watched how the current curled around half-buried rocks, how the water darkened where it grew deep, how driftwood moved faster in certain channels. To others, it was just water. To Arthur, it was memory, warning, and survival, all woven together. His ferry rested against the shore-thick planks, iron chains, scarred from years of hard use. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong. Arthur had built it himself, after the old one failed long ago. He trusted this one with his life, and with the lives of those desperate enough to cross. By mid-morning, settlers arrived. Wagons lined up, wheels creaking under the weight of supplies and hope. Children clung to their mothers. Men tried to look brave, though their eyes betrayed them as they stared at the water. Arthur moved among them calmly. Unload anything unnecessary. Keep animals steady. Listen carefully, and do exactly as I say. His voice was firm, practiced. Fear had no place on the ferry. That was when he noticed her. She wasn't panicking like the others. She stood slightly apart, watching the river with a thoughtful expression, as though she were studying it, rather than fearing it. A leather camera case hung from her shoulder, worn but well cared for. Dust coated her boots, proof of long miles traveled. Arthur approached her. "You crossing today?" She turned, surprised, then smiled politely. "Yes, my name's Rose Calder." "Arthur Hale," he replied. "I run the ferry." Her gaze drifted back to the river. "I've heard stories about this crossing. Most of them are true," Arthur said. "That's exactly why I'm here," she replied. "I'm a traveling photographer. I document frontier life places people remember, and places they don't want to." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "This is one folks don't want to remember." Rose smiled faintly. "Those are usually the most important ones." Arthur didn't respond. He turned back to his work, but her words followed him like an echo. As the ferry pushed away from the bank, the river tugged hard, testing its weight. The wood groaned softly beneath their feet. Arthur gripped the oar muscles, tightening as he guided the ferry into the current. Halfway across, a strong pull rocked the platform. A child cried out. Rose lifted her camera. "You might want to hold on," Arthur warned. "I am," she said, though she didn't lower the camera. Arthur maneuvered carefully, reading the water as he always did. The current fought him, but slowly, steadily, the ferry moved forward. When the boards scraped against the far bank, a collective breath was released. Relief swept through the settlers like a quiet prayer answered. As they disembarked, Rose approached Arthur again. "That was extraordinary," she said. "You didn't fight the river. You listened to it." Arthur secured the rope and nodded once. "That's how you survive." Rose hesitated, then said, "I think I'll stay a few days. There's more to this place." Arthur looked back at the river, then at her. For the first time in years, he didn't mind the thought. Rose kept her word and stayed. Each morning, Arthur found her near the riverbank before the settlers arrived. Her camera balanced carefully on its tripod, her eyes fixed on the slow-moving water as dawn light spilled across its surface. She worked quietly, respectfully, never stepping in the way, never distracting those preparing to cross. Arthur pretended not to notice how often he looked for her. By the third day, her presence felt strangely natural. She captured moments Arthur had long stopped seeing, the way a mother whispered prayers before stepping onto the ferry, the tight grip of a father's hand on the wagon reins, the cautious hope in children's eyes when they reached the far bank safely. "You make it look beautiful," Arthur said one afternoon, as she adjusted her equipment. Rose smiled without looking up. "It already is. People just forget to see it." Arthur wasn't sure he agreed, but he didn't argue. As days passed, Rose began helping where she could, holding ropes, calming nervous horses, guiding families off the ferry. She learned quickly, listening carefully when Arthur explained the river's dangers. "That part looks calm," she said once, pointing downstream. "That's where it kills," Arthur replied. "Deep and fast." She nodded, filing the knowledge away. Evenings brought quieter moments. Rose sat outside Arthur's small cabin, carefully developing her photographs in makeshift trays. Arthur watched from a distance at first, unsure where he fit into this new rhythm. One night, curiosity got the better of him. "Can I see?" Rose looked up, surprised, then gestured him closer. She handed him a finished photograph. Arthur stared. It was the ferry at sunset, his silhouette framed against the river, the water glowing gold instead of black. For a moment, he barely recognized himself. "That's how you see me?" he asked. "That's how the river sees you," Rose said gently. Steady, unmoving. Arthur swallowed. No one had ever described him that way. Over time, Rose shared pieces of her past. She spoke of growing up in the East, of losing her parents young, of choosing the road instead of a quiet life that felt too small for her grief. "I don't stay long in one place," she admitted. "But some places feel heavier, like they're asking you to stop." Arthur understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. The river reminded him daily of what he'd lost. Years ago, a sudden flood had overturned his ferry, taking his wife and young son with it. Arthur had survived, dragged ashore by strangers. He'd rebuilt the ferry, stayed by the river, and paid his debt in crossings and caution. Rose didn't know that story yet. Late one afternoon, dark clouds gathered upstream. Arthur's jaw tightened as he watched the water change color, growing thick and restless. "We're done for today," he announced. Rivers turning. Most settlers listened. One man didn't. Before Arthur could stop him, the man pushed off in a small skiff, trying to cross alone. The river took him instantly, flipping the boat as if it were nothing more than driftwood. Arthur ran. He didn't think. He never did. When the river tried to claim someone, he dove in, the cold stealing his breath, the current dragging him under. The man thrashed wildly, panic making him dangerous. Arthur grabbed him, fighting the pull of the water with every ounce of strength he had left. From the shore, Rose screamed his name. Minutes felt like hours, but Arthur forced them toward a shallow edge. They collapsed onto the mud, gasping, alive. Rose was there in seconds, dropping to her knees beside Arthur. Her hands shook as she touched his face, his shoulders, as if making sure he was real. "You can't keep doing that," she said, voice breaking. Arthur coughed, trying to catch his breath. Couldn't let him die. Rose's eyes filled with tears. "And what about you?" Arthur met her gaze, something heavy settling between them. For the first time, the river hadn't just tested his strength. It had revealed how much losing him would hurt someone else. The rain began that night. At first, it was gentle soft, drops tapping against the cabin roof like distant footsteps. By morning, it had become a relentless downpour. Arthur stood at the riverbank, coat soaked through, watching the black willows swell and darken. The calm surface from days before was gone, replaced by violent currents, twisting around debris carried from miles upstream. The river was waking. Settlers gathered in uneasy clusters, their plans unraveling with every inch the water rose. Wagons bogged down in mud, supplies ran low. Winter's shadow pressed closer. Arthur raised his voice above the rain. "No crossings today. This river will kill anyone who tries." Fear sparked arguments. Some begged, others demanded. Arthur didn't bend. Rose stood beside him, rain plastering her hair to her face, camera tucked safely away. She watched him manage the growing tension, firm but never cruel. "You're saving them from themselves," she said quietly. Arthur didn't answer. He knew too well what happened when desperation outweighed caution. By midday, a shout cut through the storm. A wagon had slipped. One of the rear wheels sank into the mud near the river's edge. And before anyone could react, the weight shifted. The wagon slid sideways, its front end plunging into the water. A woman screamed. 2 children cried from inside. Arthur ran. He grabbed a rope, shouting for help as the current tugged at the wagon, trying to pull it free from the bank. The water surged higher, soaking his boots, numbing his legs. Rose didn't hesitate. She dropped her camera and ran to him, planting her feet in the mud. "Tell me what to do," she shouted. "Hold the line, don't let it slack," Arthur yelled. The river fought like a living thing. Water slammed against the wagon, creeping higher, filling the bed inch by inch. Arthur strained, muscles screaming as he wrapped the rope around his arm, bracing himself against the pull. Rose leaned back with all her weight, hands raw as the rope burned her palms. "I've got it," she cried through clenched teeth. Slowly, agonizingly, the wagon shifted. Other settlers rushed forward, grabbing the rope, adding their strength. With one final surge, they dragged the wagon back onto solid ground. The family scrambled out, shaking and sobbing, clutching one another. Arthur collapsed to his knees, chest heaving. Rain blurred his vision. Rose knelt beside him, gripping his hand tightly. "You don't have to do everything alone," she said, her voice fierce and gentle all at once. Arthur looked at her, truly seeing her in that moment, not just as a visitor, not just as an observer, but as someone willing to stand beside him in the worst of it. That night, the storm trapped everyone where they were. Arthur invited Rose into his cabin, the small space lit by a single lantern. The sound of rushing water filled the silence between them. Arthur stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. "I haven't told you why I stay." Rose waited. "Years ago," he said quietly, "my wife and son were on the ferry when the river rose faster than I expected. One mistake, one moment," his voice broke. "I lived. They didn't." Rose reached for his hand, holding it without a word. "I stayed because leaving felt like running," Arthur continued. "And staying felt like penance." Rose's eyes glistened. "What you're doing now isn't punishment. It's protection." Arthur finally looked at her. "Some days, I can almost believe that." She leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. "You're not alone anymore, Arthur." The kiss that followed was slow and hesitant, born of shared grief and hard-earned trust. Outside, the river roared, furious and unyielding. But inside the cabin, something steady took hold, something strong enough to face the current. The storm eventually passed, leaving the land soaked and silent. The Black Willow River settled, but it never truly rested. Arthur watched it closely in the days that followed, alert for hidden dangers beneath the calmer surface. A large group of settlers arrived one cold morning, larger than any Arthur had seen at once. Their supplies were heavy, their faces tired, and their urgency unmistakable. Winter winds whispered through the grass, reminding everyone that time was running out. Arthur studied the river, then the sky. "We can cross," he said finally, "but it has to be done carefully." Rose stood beside him. "I'll help." Arthur hesitated. "If something goes wrong, I know," she said firmly. "I trust you." The ferry groaned under the weight as wagons rolled aboard. Arthur gave instructions, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. Rose moved among the settlers, calming children, steadying horses, her presence grounding the growing tension. They pushed off. The river tugged harder than Arthur liked, pulling the ferry sideways. He adjusted the oar, muscles tightening as he compensated for the current. Halfway across, a violent jolt rocked the ferry. A crack echoed through the air. "Planks split," someone shouted. Water surged through the gap, cold and fast. Arthur reacted instantly, shouting orders, steering toward the far bank while sealing the break as best he could. Panic spread, but Rose raised her voice above it. "Stay where you are. He's got this." Another jolt, then a sharp snap. The main rope broke free. The ferry spun, slamming against the current. Arthur lost his footing and was thrown into the river. "Arthur!" Rose screamed. The water swallowed him. Without hesitation, Rose grabbed the spare rope and dove in. The cold stole her breath, but she fought through it. Eyes locked on Arthur's dark shape beneath the surface. She reached him, looping the rope around his chest, as he struggled to stay conscious. "Hold on to me," she cried. Settlers, on the ferry and the far bank, pulled together, hauling them both from the water, inch by inch. When Arthur finally hit the shore, he lay gasping, coughing up river water. Rose collapsed beside him, shaking violently. Arthur turned his head toward her. "You shouldn't have jumped." Rose let out a breathless laugh that turned into a sob. "You don't get to disappear on me." Arthur reached for her hand, gripping it tightly. "I don't plan to." The ferry was damaged, but held long enough for the settlers to cross safely. By sunset, the river had claimed nothing that day. As the settlers thanked him, Arthur barely heard them. His attention stayed on Rose, her courage, her recklessness, her unwavering faith in him. Later, as they stood together watching the sun dip below the horizon, Arthur spoke quietly. "I've lived beside this river, thinking it would only ever take from me," he said. "But it gave me something back." Rose smiled softly. "It gave us each other." Arthur took a breath, heart pounding harder than any crossing. When the last settlers passed through, "Stay, build a life here with me." Rose's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I was already staying," she said. "I was just waiting for you to ask." The river flowed on beside them, dark and endless. But for the first time, Arthur didn't feel its weight pressing him down. Spring arrived slowly along the Black Willow River. Snowmelt fed the water, but it no longer raged as it once had. Wildflowers bloomed along the banks, softening the land that had seen so much loss. Arthur stood at the river's edge, watching the ferry drift gently against its moorings, the morning sun warming his face. Rose stood beside him, her camera raised not to capture danger or fear this time, but life. Settlers still came, though fewer now. Most of the winter crossings were finished, and those who remained had begun building homes on the far bank. The river was no longer just an obstacle. It was a boundary between what had been and what could be. Arthur had changed to. He still respected the river, still listened to its warnings, but he no longer carried its weight alone. Rose worked beside him each day, helping with the ferry, tending the small shelter they had built for travelers, and documenting the stories of those who passed through. One afternoon, Rose showed Arthur a photograph she had kept hidden. It was an old image she had taken weeks earlier, Arthur standing at the oar, face set with quiet determination, the river swirling around him. But what caught Arthur's breath was the light. The river looked almost gentle, as if yielding. "That's the day I knew I loved you," Rose said softly. Arthur swallowed. "I spent years thinking this place only existed to remind me of what I lost." Rose slipped her hand into his. "And now it reminds me why I stayed." That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the water in gold and amber, Arthur led Rose to the riverbank. He knelt, pulling a simple ring from his pocket-smooth metal, shaped by his own hands. "I can't promise an easy life," Arthur said. "The river will always be dangerous. The road will always be uncertain." Rose's eyes shone. "I don't want easy." Arthur looked up at her, voice steady. "Then promise to cross every hard thing with me." Tears spilled freely as Rose nodded. "I promise." They embraced as the river flowed on beside them, carrying stories of loss, courage, and love downstream. The Black Willow would always remember the lives it had taken, but now it also remembered the promise made on its shore. A ferryman who learned to let go, a photographer who chose to stay, and a love strong enough to outlast the current. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.